What a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bongbong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Let me remind everyone of the letter which President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed, it's on the screen, and in which he gave a cast-iron undertaking that his government, and I quote, will not assist the ICC in any way, shape or form. Well, as we know, he failed to keep that promise. What a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bongbong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Your Honours, Rodrigo Duterte was and will always remain a unique phenomenon. His style of statesmanship was novel and unpalatable to many. His expletives and hyperbole grated, while his honesty and wild popularity irritated. He spoke openly, from the heart, sincerely and truthfully. Images carefully crafted to shock the conscience and to sway the emotions, and, I may say, to be used by the prosecutor when they don't even relate to the charges. And they gave their slick reports bold titles lifted straight out of a James Bond movie, such as License to Kill, One Shot to the Head, You Can Die Any Time, or simply, They Just Kill. The photographers are feted and their shots exhibited as art all over the world, and the brave journalists who act as their sources win awards and Nobel Prizes. And slowly but surely, their narrative becomes the sacred, unchallengeable and unshakable truth. And so the pressure builds up, and the academics who haunt the corridors of the progressive left law faculties far away in the United States tweet their research and publish their articles pontificating about crimes against humanity, systematic attacks against the civilian population, and they point their finger at one man alone, and bandy about slogans such as accountability and the prevention of impunity. They give their gratuitous advice on what should be done, sometimes academics who formerly worked alongside the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Communications and complaints are filed, and the rest, as they say, is history.
We're finding out that the earlier statements of Marcos Jr., who, as you know, is a drug addict, is all a lie, because while he was saying that they would not cooperate with the ICC, we now have information indicating that he has, in fact, extended full support to the ICC, which negates what he has said. And the reason for this, I think, is Marcos, it's in his genes to want to stay in office forever. And I think the plan is this time around, they will not allow the people to remove them from power. And that means destroying the biggest threat to their political reign, and that is the Duterte family.
We can display that on the screen, and the part that I want to read is highlighted. And President Duterte was very clear on this matter, he said, Aguirre, that there will be no killing of unarmed offenders, meaning to say that you use force only when your life is in danger. Later on, in the very same interview, Aguirre would repeat the same theme which exculpates Mr. Duterte, PHL OTP 00090340 at page 4. After all, if the intention was cold-blooded murder, why go to the bother of involving a judge? Official investigative materials also indicate that officers approached the premises, announced the execution of the warrant, and were met with gunfire that struck a patrol vehicle and injured an officer, prompting a return of fire. This directly refutes what Ms. Masita so categorically claimed on Tuesday, namely that none of the arresting officers were ever harmed during the operations. Transcript T5, page 44, line 24. In every case, the victim was killed, and none of the arresting officers were harmed. The exchange of fire, as reported, is supported by the fact that gunpowder residue was found on 7 individuals, including on the mayor himself, and a paraffin test turned out positive on the person of one of the victims, indicating that he had discharged a firearm, something totally negating the gun plant theory proposed by the prosecution's only witness. It is also worth stressing that 4 individuals were arrested alive following the operation, and that one of them was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment after the domestic courts rejected claims of evidence planting. That fact alone is not consistent with a theory of indiscriminate execution, but is rather consistent instead with arrest and prosecution within the boundaries of the law and not indiscriminate use of force. So to summarize, across incidents 10 to 14, count 2, we see absolutely no evidence whatsoever of any attribution to Mr. Duterte on the granular level. I asked him why. I said to him, "Sir, don't you understand? They accuse you of murder. They say that you murdered thousands when you were the mayor and when you were ruling your country." And then he repeated the question that he has always asked me for a year or more. How does the prosecution say that I did this? Out of that huge database of evidence on which the prosecution relies, I repeat that there is absolutely nothing to directly link Rodrigo Duterte to the 78 deaths alleged. That is why they rely on a few selective and vociferous individuals in the Duterte administration, calling them co-perpetrators, just so it can artificially superimpose their fantasy common plan theory linking Rodrigo Duterte to the victims. Your Honours, I beg you to be guided by evidence, which must reach a minimal level of integrity. Be persuaded by your own innate sense of justice and by your own collective years of experience. But most importantly, be guided by coherent evidence and by common sense. I ask you, I beg you not to confirm any of the charges. I ask you to let Rodrigo Duterte return to the Philippines, not to govern, but simply to let him live out the rest of his days in peace, in his humble dwelling in Davao. And with that, Your Honours, I conclude, and I wish to thank you for your patience and to thank the parties and the participants, and most importantly, my team, Dov Jacobs, Havnit Nikisetti, Sandrine Dusena, Davide Rancati, Alexandra Dezev Davi, Nicholas Russo, and Kaylin Chen, all of whom have worked throughout the last year for one cause alone, and that is to serve our client, Mr. Rodrigo Duterte, faithfully.